Hey everybody, here's a computer guide for service today. This is a HP Media Center PC M7167C, and what's going on with this machine is it doesn't want to turn on. And the problem with this computer is the motherboard. Yeah, I apologize for not making a video before I got started on this thing, but more or less I just dug into it right away because I was kind of in a hurry to get started. So I kind of just dug in and diagnosed it to see what the problem was. And the motherboard will not post. The power supply does start, but the power supply does have some bad capacitors, so I'm replacing that too. Here's a closer look at everything. The owner of this computer has taken very good care of it. He has upgraded the memory, installed Windows 7, and he keeps it cleaned out on a regular basis. So this computer here is actually, it came to me in decent condition, really clean and everything. Here's the power supply to come out of it. This is a Hypro 300 watt unit. I've actually worked on one of these before. You can see the spec label or not. Pause, view specs. It has some bad TPO capacitors inside of it, so I'm going to recap this power supply. And here I have a Bestech unit, 300 watt power supply, that I'm going to install into its place. This computer here was very nice back in its day, and it actually still is a really nice machine. It has a DVD burner, and I believe the owner installed a second DVD burner because the faceplate says that this was a DVD-ROM, but this is actually a burner. Not to mention, this one here is SATA, the top is IDE. And of course, being a media center machine, this computer came with a TV tuner. Also has a Pentium D processor. Not sure exactly what the specs on that are just yet. I'll find out when I take out the motherboard. So anyways, the motherboard I'm going to be putting in to this computer came out of that old Acer that I made a video about a while back. It was quite a while ago. It was that Veriton tower that was made in the United States and had the bad power supply in it. But the motherboard works just fine. And it's actually a pretty well built board. I think FIC was the manufacturer of this board. This board seems very well built because it has heat sinks on the VRMs. If I'm not mistaken, when I looked online, it said it was compatible with CPUs all the way up to the Core 2 Duo series. It's a Socket 775 motherboard. And the computer also had a 300 gig hard drive in it. So now let's go ahead and take this whole board out and take out the memory and the CPU. Okay, just got finished pulling the motherboard out of the computer, and this is what it looks like. It's got a lot of connections on the back. Digital audio in and out, video, multi-channel audio. Anyways, it's got FireWire, USB, Ethernet, PS2. It's got a PCI Express slot on it for video cards. It's got 3 PCI slots. Of course, pretty decent board for a OEM machine. Of course, real basic if it was a custom build, but anyways, I'm going to explain what was going on with this motherboard. Basically, in the computer, the power supply would get power because it has a little green light on the back. The light would light up, and you press the button on the front of the computer, nothing. So what I did is I took the power connections loose from the motherboard, and I tested the power supply, make sure it come on, and it did. And I pulled the connections loose from the front panel right here, and used a screwdriver to test it here to make sure it wasn't a switch. And even though I shorted this terminal for the power on, it still didn't come on. So obviously it's the board. Now I'll go ahead and take this heatsink loose and see what kind of CPU we got. I know it's a Pentium D, just not sure what type. This computer has the Intel Pentium D 820 processor. Here's what it looks like. Can't really get a good focus on it. There we go. That's a little better. So anyways, pause to view specs. Try to keep the camera as still as I can. Alright, let's go ahead and pull this CPU out and install it to the motherboard. And of course, like I said, I don't recommend you getting your fingers near these pins, but this board here doesn't work. But I still recommend it because if you're not careful, these little pins can actually slice your finger. Put the CPU to the side. The thing I like about Intel CPUs, the newer ones, is they don't have pins on the bottom. Unlike the newer AMDs, which still have pins. It really disappoints me. But these Intel chips, you can just toss them around, store multiple Intel chips in a bag, anti-static bag, not to worry about your pins getting broken. Yet on the flip side, you then have to worry about the pins on your motherboard. So it's either way, you still have to kind of watch out for pins when you're storing either your motherboard or your CPU. Go ahead and take off the back plate, which if you watched my I recently got a comment on my tutorial video on how to install an Intel CPU cooler with a backplate. This is what the backplate looks like on most coolers. I don't think I showed the backplate in the video. And this heatsink is a cooler master. It appears to be, I would say aluminum. Not really sure. It's probably nickel plated. It looks real shiny. It's actually a decent cooler for such a, OEM machine. And this particular backplate is held on with adhesive, so I got to get that off. Okay, the backplate's been removed, and this is what it looks like. If I have to show you something else too. On the back of this board, you can see the discoloration from the heat from the VRMs. This is why I don't like motherboards that don't have VRM cooling, such as heat sinks on the MOSFETs. On this motherboard, we just have the MOSFET sticking up with no sort of cooling on. If you notice how this heat sink is designed, the air only flows this way and not this way. So while these MOSFETs were cooled a little better, there's not anywhere near as much discoloration. These here had a lot more discoloration. It's fair to point that out. And here's the board again that I'm putting in this computer. Notice the heat sinks on the MOSFETs. Notice no discoloration whatsoever. Not that I can see anyway. Looks fine to me. Now I'll go ahead and drop in the CPU. And we'll now go ahead and get this cleaned up and put some thermal paste on the CPU. And we'll install the cooler. Okay, now that both the CPU and the heatsink are cleaned up, I'm going to install thermal paste. And seeing that the heat spreader, the surface area on the heat spreader is smaller than the surface area of the base of the cooler, I'll be installing the paste to the heat spreader. In this case, I'm going to spread it a little bit on the thick side, but not too awful thick. Reason being is the base on the cooler is not smooth. I can actually run my fingernail across the cooler base. You can feel the way that it's machined. There's gaps in there, so we need to make sure this thermal paste fills those gaps really good. Now when you have, let's say, a cooler that has a perfectly flat base, you apply the paste as thin as possible, and when you're doing serious, you need serious cooling for overclocking or whatever, use Arctic Silver 5. And of course, anytime else, I just use basic paste. Now, go ahead and install the cooler. First, I'll go ahead and stick this back plate under the motherboard. We'll set the cooler into the back plate and tighten down the screws. Be a better view so you can see things better. Get a nice high def focus. And just tighten each screw down a little bit at a time, going diagonally across the cooler. The purpose of this is to try to evenly apply tension. Because you don't want to put too much tension on one corner at a given time. Which this cooler is spring loaded. Most coolers nowadays that you use back plates are spring loaded. And although if you don't have a case with an open spot where you can access back plates, this can be a little frustrating with back plate based coolers on Intel setups, but I do like these a lot better than the push pin coolers. Now I'm just going to go ahead and install the memory. And the owner of this computer upgraded his memory. And they kind of used a mix of the stock memory and aftermarket memory. So they got a OEM 512MX stick, a Samsung Crucial stick, another Samsung Crucial stick, and another stock stick. I recommend when it comes to upgrading your memory nowadays, I think you're best off just replacing all the memory so that way you have equal timings on all your RAM, and the new memory will perform a lot better, especially when you're working with OEM computers, because let's say even the most basic G-Skill memory off a Newegg performs a lot better than the OEM stuff that comes in these computers. Let me tell you, even on these basic boards, it makes a big difference. Let's say, for instance, in my Dell Inspiron 1525, upgraded the stock RAM to G-Skill, and it made a big difference in performance. So anyways, go ahead and install this RAM. If I install it in the wrong method for dual channel, I'll fix that later on. It's like all these boards are different when it comes to dual channel configurations. Anyways, when you're installing RAM, You just line up the notch and press it in. That simple. If you're curious to know what kind of RAM this is DDR2. The stock memory is, get this, PC2 3200 333. The RAM I'm putting in is PC2 4200 444. That's what it says anyway on the sticker. So PC2 4200 versus PC2 3200. That's still very slow RAM. Even the 4200 is. When it comes to DDR2, DDR2 800 or 6400 is decent. Anyways, the memory is installed. Now it's going to go ahead and install this board into the case. Alright, now I'm going to remove the IO shield plate. And to get it out, we got to hit with a screwdriver. Back in a screwdriver, and usually they'll pop right out. Sometimes they can be difficult. Other times they pop right out. Alrighty. Install the shield plate for the motherboard when installing. But be careful with these things because they can cut your fingers. The metal on these things are very sharp. Usually on higher quality cases they go in pretty easy, but on cheap flimsy cases it can be a real pain. Especially if you cut yourself. Then we're literally talking about pain. Now, I'm going to move all the cables out of the way. And I'm hoping this motherboard has all the needed connections. I know it does for USB, but we'll see here shortly. To be honest with you, these HP Media Center cases are a real pain to work in because you got to take out this big old, I don't know if you can see or not, but these things have a big old media drive thing that sticks way out, and you got to take that out just to get the motherboard memory and stuff. It's real cramped. Now I'm going to bolt in the motherboard. Attach all the screws. Just start them in, don't tighten them all the way. Make them almost tight, but not all the way. Makes things a lot easier to double check to make sure things are lined up properly. Alright, since everything's lined up, we can fully tighten down all the screws. Now I'm going to make all the connections. So in this video you're kind of getting a tutorial on how to install a CPU, change out a CPU core, change out memory, install memory, install motherboard, all that kind of stuff. So you're getting a good bit of education out of this video. Let's see. Make our USB connections. And let me see. This motherboard does not have firewire. It's the closest board I had available to the original. So the lack of firewire shouldn't be a big issue, because not many people even use it nowadays, and I'll let the owner know. I seriously doubt he even used the firewire to begin with, because of course USB is really the main technology. This is audio. We do have that. This USB connection goes to the media card reader. Okay, pardon me for some of my work being done over here was kind of out of camera view, but anyways, now I'm going to go ahead and plug in the front panel connections. And let me tell you, this stuff is a lot easier than how it used to be. Used to be, when you had to plug in your front panel connections, nothing was standard. Used to be when you plugged in your front panel connections, you had to manually plug in each LED and button one by one, from your power to reset to your LEDs, your hard drive LED, power LED, that sort of stuff. And on your USB connections, a lot of times you had to manually plug in everything pin by pin. It wasn't very easy, but nowadays everything has kind of gotten its own uniform, universal plug, which makes things a lot easier. I'm just having a look at this board. Now I just gotta find out where the system fan header is. It should have one. Of course, the CPU fan's plugged in. Here it is, down here. This board has a rear USB hub back here. So, all in all, this motherboard has 3 sets of USB headers. It's not often you find this many connections on a micro ATX board. Anyways, let's continue on. I'm not trying to bore you out or anything. And plug up our SATA connections. Since this is a DVD drive, we'll plug this into SATA 2 or SATA 1, because the first SATA connection on this board is SATA 0. Slide it in. We're going to plug in our IDE cable for the DVD drive. Not really sure why this computer has two burners in it. I think the owner might to consider a Blu-ray drive with SATA. Completely get rid of IDE altogether, because that's a very air-restricting cable. Anyways, now we'll go ahead and plug in. We're going to install our cards. I gotta take out this shield because this motherboard has a slightly different layout. I'm gonna move that down here to where the PCI Express 1 slot is. Come on. There. First we'll put the modem right here. Then we'll install our TV tuner down here. I'm going to plug this cable here and get rid of the knot to make it a little bit longer. I'll go ahead and screw these cards in. Okay, those are now installed. We'll go ahead and put the power supply in. Power supply here is a Bestech HTX 312Z. Came out of HP, going back into HP. All the caps look good in this one, so we're good to go. And that power supply I took out, I'll recap it and it'll be good as new. Show you around back what it looks like when you're installing a power supply. I don't know if you can see. You can barely see. You just slide it in and attach 4 screws, which I'll do now. My full-size tripod is not very friendly at maneuverability when it comes to getting a view like this. Now I'm going to make the needed connections. I'm going to plug in our 24-pin connection. You can see it now. Let me try to rearrange this where you can kind of see. Trying to anyway. I'm going to slide this in. Now, we'll go ahead and plug this in. Don't forget this one, because you'll be wondering why the computer's not posting when you go to turn it on. And while I'm at it, we're going to plug in this connection here to the TV tuner card. I'm going to have to cut the zip tie here so I can access these SATA power connections. I'll tell you what, having a mix of drives in this thing, especially in the optical drives, can be very messy when it comes to your power connections. So I'm having to try to make do with this as much as I can. Yeah, I gotta feed this SATA connector way down here. Not the easiest thing to do. Okay, that's in. Let me plug that SATA cable back in. Yeah, these OEM computers can be the toughest to work on because the cases are so crammed. Not to mention that really does help your airflow too. In actuality, it hinders it. Come on. That's in. I'll tell you what's the truth, trying to tie these cables up might be a dream. After trying to put this thing back together. Next thing we gotta go and do is install the big media drive bay thing that contains a hard drive and everything. It's a big old hunk of metal. That's what it looks like right here. It's huge. And of course there's a hard drive. And this is held in by a couple of screws. Go and attach those. And try and make our needed connections. Plug in this SATA cable. You can see or not. I'll tell you what, these locking SATA cables are a nice thing to have, but unfortunately this motherboard doesn't have the newer style connections to lock the connections in. That's alright though. Attach the power cable. And there's a mullet connection down here too for the media drive bay. And plug that in. And this power supply has locking SATA power connections too. Now it's going to clean its mess up a little bit. I think we'll be okay. Well, I got everything connected inside this computer, but it's still kind of a rat's nest. But of course, this being an HP, at this age, is kind of be expected. At least they got their act together in 2007 and changed their case format. Just going to put the front bezel back on. Should just snap right in. And that's it. Okay, now it's time for the moment of truth. We'll be plugging this thing back up, making all needed connections, and press the power button, and hope for the best. Alright, now for the moment of truth. And of course, this board was pulled from the Acer. It's kind of funny seeing the Acer logo come up on a HP computer. It's a pretty loud fan there too. See if we can quieten it down a little bit. It's going to enable that. Obviously you can see that the CPU temp and the system temp is way off. 1 degree Celsius. Isn't that like in the 30s in Fahrenheit? Now of course it's not that cold in here. It's like 80 degrees in here. It's saying the CPU fan is at 52. But it also says the system fan is going that fast, which I know ain't quite true. Though both fans are putting out a lot of air. So anyways, it still thinks it's a Veriton 6800. The date and time is correct. From what I believe, it is actually 10:47, so it's not too far off. And we are seeing all the drives. Seeing all the memory, 3 gigs of RAM. Just quickly going through here, make sure everything's alright. This needs to be the hard disk, not LAN. And I'll tell you what's the truth for OEM motherboard. It's got a lot of features in it. I seriously believe you could use. There's actually some software out there. It's a matter of finding it. I'm pretty sure there's some locked features in here. Like you go to frequency control. I'm sure if you was to really dig through and unlock some features, you could probably overclock this motherboard. So anyways, that was a successful motherboard transplant. You got to learn some things, and from here on out, I'm going to go ahead and go into Windows and make sure everything's set up and ready to go. Anyways, any questions or comments, feel free to ask.